In light of Warner Bros. Thinking it's okay to patent video game mechanics that are basically just broad concepts, I thought it'd be fun to look into the classic mechanics that affected gaming in such a groundbreaking way we still see them pop up in new releases. It's also fun to think that if some of these list entries had been patented back when they were created, we most likely wouldn't have video games today. Every video game you have ever played and enjoyed is the product of countless hours sat in front of a computer, going through reams upon reams of never-ending code. It still boggles my mind that this all adds up to end in this. It's scientific discovery at its absolute finest. But, like every scientific discovery, there's the potential for things to go wrong. That's why we have tragedies like this. Sometimes then, if we're lucky, if we're very, very lucky, the accidents that slip through the cracks into the coding of our much beloved video games become the basis for a whole new, completely unique genre. And I want to share some of those happy accidents with you today. So put down whatever you're doing, shut up, and enjoy the accidental birth behind your favourite video game mechanics. If you've ever played an open world game, there's a good chance you owe that experience to Grand Theft Auto. From day one, the devs at Rockstar have strived to create the absolute best in sandbox gaming, but it wasn't always that way. Back in 1995, a small studio known as DMA Design Limited were hard at work on their latest game, Race and Chase. Unfortunately, development wasn't going so well. Despite months of hard work, Race and Chase was a mess. Game-breaking bugs that would crash the game entirely plagued the development. And according to designer Gary Penn, the car handling was appalling. And on several occasions, the higher-ups in the studio tried to have the project axed altogether. If it wasn't for a very timely bad line of code that caused the police cars to become uncharacteristically aggressive, the development probably would have ended soon after. One day, I think it was a bug, the police suddenly became mental and aggressive. It was because they were trying to drive through you, and that was an awesome moment because suddenly the real drama where, oh my god, the police are psycho, they're trying to ram me off the road, that was awesome. So that stayed in. From then on, the devs turned the game upside down and started focusing the gameplay on fleeing from other cars instead of racing them. And that clever change-up eventually led to the Grand Theft Auto we know and love today. Not only a household name, but also the best-selling piece of media entertainment there is. We've all experienced that feeling of loading into a new game, completely fresh to the world and gameplay we'll be progressing through for the next 8 to 100 hours. And that's not a feeling game developers take lightly. Once a developer has their core game mechanics figured out, they need to start working on balancing those mechanics throughout the whole game. No one likes when a game suddenly jumps from easy to way too difficult, or even the other way around. So countless hours are put in to make sure that every second of your gameplay experience promotes a fair difficulty curve. It's so fundamental to game design that it's been around since 1987, and that's because Space Invaders came out in 1987. I'm like 99% sure you know what Space Invaders is. But for the 1%, Space Invaders is an arcade shoot-'em-up where you destroy all the invading ships before they reach the bottom of the screen. It's fairly simple stuff, and originally, it was meant to be even simpler. You see, the thing that makes Space Invaders intensely addictive is that after you start to destroy the ships, the others start to get faster. So the closer you get to winning, the harder and faster the game tries to stop you. And that wasn't supposed to happen. Once Tomohiro Nishikado, sorry if I butchered that, started testing his creation, he found that as each alien ship was removed from the game, the processor was able to render the remaining ships faster, therefore making them move faster, unintentionally creating a situation where the better you play, the more the difficulty increases. The gaming community as a whole has such a deep fascination with Easter eggs, and it's easy to see why. Whether it's a funny joke slipped in out of sight by the game's devs, or a secret weapon that'll make the game a breeze to beat. Regardless of the content, they're usually always done in the spirit of fun. Interestingly enough though, the first ever Easter egg was done in spite. Back in 1979, Atari commissioned a programmer named Warren Robinette to create a game called Adventure. And despite the game making process being nowhere near as extravagant as it exists today, the typical scumbag trappings of the industry did. At the time, the individual programmers weren't credited for their work, and Robinette took issue with that. And rightly so. Robinette was only paid $20,000 a year, while Atari went on to sell over 1 million copies of Adventure. So instead of throwing away his job by complaining, he took the subtle approach and hid a secret room behind a complex series of tasks. Convoluted enough that no one working at Atari could find it easily, but not so impossible that random players couldn't find it with a few low-key helpful hints from Warren along the way. After all that planning and scheming, it all paid off for Warren Robinette. He successfully stuck it to Atari by hiding a secret room that just said created by Warren Robinette. Yeah, pretty tame by today's standards, but for a kid in the late 70s, this was better than Fortnite. Stealth games have become a mainstay genre in gaming. Even the yearly Call of Duty game has a mission dedicated solely to the art of crawling past people really slowly. And like every other entry on this list, it nearly didn't happen. To find the source of stealth in video games, we have to go back to the granddaddy of stealth itself, Metal Gear. Not Metal Gear Solid, I'm talking about the original arcade game released on the MSX in 1987. Creator Hideo Kojima's intent was to create an action game taking inspiration from action films of the time. Even the box art features a character that's less Solid Snake and more definitely Michael Biehn. And unlike some of the others on this list, the story here isn't one of accidental creation, more one of creatively overcoming an obstacle. Kojima wanted to make an action game, but the hardware couldn't handle all the enemies and bullets on screen at the same time. So instead of scaling back the amount of assets and calling it there, Hideo and his team worked to split the focus between action and stealth. If they couldn't have large amounts of enemies on screen at once, they'd remove some of the enemies and make the remaining enemies more of a threat. And instead of getting in a shootout with those tougher enemies, the aim shifted to being about getting past them unnoticed. And thus, the stealth gameplay was born. And I'd happily take it all back if it meant I never had to play a bloody forced instant fail stealth section ever again. You ever rip a man's head off in Mortal Kombat? If you have, you'll know that to get to that point, you gotta beat your opponent down first. In today's modern fighting games, that's not so hard to do, so long as you can remember endless reels of combo pages on the fly. Back in the day, it was much more simple. You had 4 buttons, 1 for each limb, and a jump button. You press one limb button before the previous limb button has finished its attack, nothing would happen. That is until Street Fighter 2, when during the testing phase, a producer noticed a bug that let you slip in extra hits if you timed the button presses perfectly. Faced with the decision of removing it or not, the devs went with not, assuming nothing would come of it. They obviously underestimated their audience, because it became a fundamental part of the game and a rite of passage for anyone claiming to be a street fighting master. Realizing the unofficial success of the bug, the team behind Street Fighter decided to expand on that idea in their next game. And the rest, as they say, is apparently history. To top off the list, we'll finish with what might be the most wholesome entry on the list. Back in the 80s, again, 1985 to be exact, the team behind the Konami-published scrolling shooter Gradius were hard at work putting the game together. Unfortunately for one of the programmers, they sucked at their own game. And if you can't beat your own game, how are you supposed to test it? So the programmer came up with the ingenious idea of embedding a random sequence of button prompts that would unlock all the in-game power-ups. This let him play the game to ensure that it was ready for the masses. And I think you can see where this is going. He forgot to take the sequence out. And yet again, somehow, people found out what that code was. Up, up, down, down, left, right, B, A. That little mistake ended up becoming the pop culture phenomenon known as the Konami Code. Hey guys, thanks for joining me on this little history lesson. If you know any interesting behind the scenes gaming stories, please do not hesitate to drop them in the comment section below. And if you could like and or subscribe, that would really be appreciated. Cheers. As a little treat for those of you that sat to the end of this, I'll give you a sneaky bonus entry. You know Lara Croft's boobs? They were a complete accident. Basically, a whole load of boys in the 90s had their sexual awakening because some dev slipped on their mouse wheel and pushed the scale boob size up too far. And that's why I love video games.